It's my immense pleasure to welcome back Joseph Lindsley to the channel. Now, many of you will be familiar with him. He's reported pretty much every day from Ukraine throughout the full-scale war since the invasion began. He is a conservative voice and one who is trying to essentially eject truthful messages back into the conservative environment in the US. There are a number of highly impactful voices doing that, including Stephen Moore, Joseph Lindsley, and a small handful of others. Of course, there are many on the Democrat side doing that, but the Democrats aren't in power anymore. They don't have any control over what happens. They don't have any control over how Ukraine gets supported from this point on. So I think having these conversations with conservative voices, impactful voices, has never been more important. And boy, we've got a lot to discuss. Before we jump into that, thank you to everybody who supports the channel through Buy Me a Coffee, Patreon, and in any other way, sending me comments, sharing, liking, all of this kind of stuff, and definitely subscribing. It makes a tremendous difference. Joe, welcome back.
Hey, Jonathan, great to see you. Hello from Kyiv. We've had a few days of calm here, which is, hard to fathom because before General Kellogg's arrival here, the preceding 10 days are an absolute nightmare. It's hard. It doesn't even seem real that we went through that. And I think for everyone who's been through the war, even people who've been in the trenches, for anyone who's in Kyiv during those two particularly very intense Russian attacks, it felt like Armageddon. It's left a lot of trauma for a lot of people here. And so I share that as a reminder because everything seems nice and pleasant today and we have some good news and some good trends, but everyone is still extremely shaken by those two horrific Russian attacks that were just about a week apart. So something important to keep in mind. And I think that those attacks have played a role in what we see as possibly an awakening in Washington. And I will say, people, you can call me conservative, it's fine. But, the first 2 years of the war, when I was reporting every day on Chicago's WGN radio, and believing that the Ukraine needs to win. As a journalist, I stand on the side of freedom. So, I still can maintain my journalistic standards while absolutely advocating for Ukraine. These things go hand in hand. I believe in freedom. And those first 2 years when Biden was president, not many people were calling me conservative, and because I was, appealing to the administration back then. And I think a lot of people sort of because everyone gets so partisan and they accuse me of being the partisan guy when actually, if you go back and look, we were, a lot of it, you and I talking on your show, how do we appeal to Jake Sullivan? We were trying to appeal to them. In some ways we did, but you know what? Everything has changed. And so I'm trying to appeal to those who are in power now, who I actually, with whom I have better connections and more familiarity. But it's funny that I get called the partisan one when I'm just, I think, the realist saying, hey, as you said, these are those who are in charge. And really at the core of my analysis of how we need to make the case for Ukraine is what the mood of the American people is. And I think people miss this. The reason why, I think there's sort of this mentality that Trump is president because, it just appeared as president. No, he ran the campaign well, better than the Harris campaign. They listened to the mood of the people. They didn't only listen to the elites, and clearly that's why he's in that position. And I think if we look closely at his decision making and his emotions and everything these past weeks, we see that he is attuned to MAGA, to the core of MAGA, at least as he perceives it. One reason why J.D. Vance is vice president is because he really does represent that MAGA heartland idea. So Trump. And MAGA is, deeply anti-foreign war, understandably, because these are Americans, Democrats and Republicans who are, tired of, the Iraq, Afghanistan stuff. They're really tired of it. And once we understand that, then we have to understand it with real empathy and say, okay, you know what? We also agree. Those things, those wars were terrible. Find the agreement, and then we can begin to say how this is different. And so that's really what my mission is now. And if you look at when Trump has begun to change tone on Ukraine, we can get into the details of what that means and to what extent that's happening. It's interesting. There's been a shift. The Russian propagandists like Alexander Dugin, Putin's Rasputin, he is doing in his tweets now exactly what many pro-Ukraine, anti-Trump people were saying a few weeks ago. It's a total flip. And I say this cautiously because I don't want the Russians to know the right tactics. But I'm not. But I'll put it this way because what I'm about to say, I say cautiously, and if everyone listening who supports Ukraine kind of helps join me in this effort, then it's worth saying. If you guys don't join me in this, then we're just giving the Russians the key. On the other hand, the good thing is the Russians, it's in their nature. They don't respect people. They don't respect democracy, and so I don't think they're quite capable of this real strategy. But it's in some interesting way. People like to call Trump a tyrant. He is actually being extremely democratic, recognizing this popular mood in America. And if you look at Dugin's tweets and a little bit from Kirill Dmitriev, uh, they were trying to flatter Trump personally, and now they've switched because now they want to mock Trump and they think that shaming Trump is the key. And if you think about it, for many pro-Ukraine people, shaming Trump was the strategy for the past months. That was not my strategy, and I don't think that's not what has worked. The thing that has worked is showing Trump, giving Trump as a salesman the arguments that he can use to sell Ukraine to the American people. I think he's starting to realize the security reasons, and he's even realizing all we can learn. Americans can learn from Ukrainian miltech. This is extraordinary. The other day, as President Zelensky said in that Newsmax interview, that Trump is now interested in Ukrainian drone technology. I've been pushing for that for a long time because the minerals deal, okay, that's something, but that ignored the human resources and amazing innovation that was happening here. And I tell you, the White House was totally unaware of that until maybe a couple of weeks ago. And so it is things like that that actually can be a powerful argument to reach America and MAGA. And so I think it's more important that we sort of realize that we need to help Trump and the administration know what to say to the base, the real story of Ukraine that we talk about every day. So to me, that's much more effective than shaming. I'm glad the Russians are now using the strategy that pro-Ukraine people were using because I know it doesn't work. So I hope the Russians keep using that strategy and let's stick to the one that works.
Absolutely, because I did some episodes last year, and when I say conservative, in the UK we have conservative with a big C, which means member of the Conservative Party, which people will often put a face at, but there's also conservative with a small c, and that denotes values. And I think there's no denigration in that use whatsoever. But what you said there is absolutely critical. It's connections. And I think one of the things that frustrated you and I during those years where we're trying to figure out, who is deciding Ukraine policy under Biden, when we're trying to figure out what that policy is, what its objectives are. And then once we kind of figure that out, that, okay, here's Sullivan. Yes, he's acting with quite a lot of leeway, but he's acting in a way that he thinks represents what the president wants. I don't think Sullivan ever did anything that went outside of what he saw as his remit and what he saw as his interpretation of Biden's instructions and intentions. And I think that's quite clear. It's Biden and Sullivan together. But the big frustration is, how do you get through? How do you cut through into that ecosystem? And frankly, you and I both knew a considerable number of people in Democratic circles, and we were able to reach a certain layer, and that's as far as it went. And I don't think the message really penetrated properly because the policy didn't really change dramatically over the period. I mean, a lot was provided to Ukraine, and that's fantastic, but it was provided to help Ukraine survive, not win. Now, we'll come to a minute whether Trump is going to do anything different or whether we're still in survival mode. But for many who, I think one of the things when it gets hyper partisan, what people are actually expressing is kind of the same frustration of how do you get through to MAGA people? How do you cut through, especially if you don't have connections, especially if you don't speak the same language, and especially if, unfortunately, many people don't have empathy for, the policies of MAGA and no empathy, as you described, for the problems and issues that gave rise to MAGA as a phenomenon. So I think people find it very difficult to cut through, and that then gets expressed in terms of insults, denigrations, which are not helpful in any way. And I think we've gone through that. But something seems to change dramatically. Now we'll come to the 50 days because that's kind of different. But General Kellogg he seemed to have been lost the last couple of months. He seemed to have been sidelined. Now he's moving back, I would say, center stage. He seems to have more of a remit to negotiate things and get things done. And at the same time, you've got a change in tone on Trump's side. Vance has been, curiously quiet. And you have a change on the Ukrainian side as well. Maybe finally taking on board that, a certain communication strategy is going to work much better with Trump and his circle. So it's an extraordinary period of flux, isn't it? And transition. Could you describe that? And then we'll go into why that is happening.
Yeah, I think, and there's an interesting, I want to make sure we mention, there's an interesting attacks that have begun on President Zelensky, which I think we should mention because that's a key part of this. And I think it's part of what the Russians are doing. When I began to see, when I first heard President Trump say that Putin was full of bullshit, my first reaction is, okay, what are the Russians going to do on the information space? And that's what I've been really focused on because, of course, they're going to do something. President Zelensky has, when they're removing the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S., which is long overdue, and started to make these little, extend these olive branches to the Trump administration. And one thing that I've been saying publicly and pushing for, if many people were hostile to this, and they accused me of being very partisan, but I said Ukraine has to separate itself from Biden policies, because they were too tied together and unjustifiably. And when people in the Trump White House, when they look at Ukraine, their lens was colored by the restrictions that Biden and Sullivan put on Ukraine, and they didn't see a separation, and they didn't have an interest to try to separate that. So the only people with an interest to separate that would be Ukraine and pro-Ukraine people, but no one was making that case. And I think part of the way, is actually Ukrainians were so grateful to America that for them criticizing any administration would be ungrateful. But then they missed the brutal reality of American politics and very democratic reality. And if you look in the past months, every Democrat who wants to have a future has publicly said we're disassociated themselves with Joe Biden. Even Joe Biden's press secretary, she became an independent. This is very important. It shows that even any Democrat that wants to have a future in America has separated themselves in some way from Joe Biden. Ukraine should simply follow that tactic. It's not rude. It's just smart. And you can do it in a polite way. And that's why when Zelensky did that in that Newsmax interview with Shelby Wilder, who's a great reporter, she often speaks to a very hostile audience. So a lot of credit to her. And President Zelensky said, yeah, Joe Biden could not do this. And that's a fact.
It's a fact, isn't it? You found a way of stating a fact without being insulting or ungrateful.
And
but it is a
that's
fact. It's demonstrable, demonstrably true.
Yeah, and it's actually, it would also, to not say that to Trump is also rude. It's rude. Trump would perceive that as rude. And so you got to find that connection. And so I think that this can start to open up. I mean, really the things that were blocking the White House and MAGA from understanding Ukraine, I think are often very simple. People, I mean, you got to look at American partisanship, and I'd rather first get victory in Ukraine, and then we can address American partisanship. I think let's do what matters most right now. And I think that if we come together on Ukraine, we will begin to find a way to heal a lot of the divides, the unjust divides we have in the U.S. And so we see. So Zelensky says that, and then what happens next? Now President Trump says, you know what? America needs Ukraine's drone technology. And this is wonderful. It's so much better than the minerals deal, because this begins to position what I've been trying to advocate for, Ukraine as an equal security and freedom partner with the United States. So Ukraine needs the high-powered American weapons. That's all. You can't push the Russians back without that. But what Ukraine has been able to do without that, or with a minimal version of that, but with their incredible drone innovation in particular, they've been able to hold the line. We're starting to talk again about Pokrovsk, that it might fall in a couple of days, weeks, whatever. It's very important every time we're in that conversation, and no one does this, especially the media, that Pokrovsk was supposed to fall last August. I don't see anyone talking about that. It's extremely important, Jonathan, to mention. What it shows that Ukrainians with incredible innovation,
13 months of holding that line and
when everyone thought
inflicting
it'd be
massive
2
casualties
weeks
on Russia.
Yeah, and I mean, and many casualties for Ukraine too. I mean, it's been bloody and horrible, but because Pokrovsk is held, Dnipro is still there, and these other major cities, and so it's extremely important. Okay, it might fall soon, just like Bakhmut fell, but Bakhmut was due to fall in June of 2022, and finally Biden sent the HIMARS, and that transformed it, and it held on for like 9 months. So we really must be proactive in telling that story. Whatever happens to Pokrovsk, telling the story very well, and this is because otherwise we're going to get crushed by the propaganda. The Russians will use it, and they know how to push the right buttons to some degree with the MAGA base. And so this is what we got to be sharp about. And you know, I don't know if you've noticed, but the day within the 24-hour period of Trump and Zelensky really, seeming to be working together. Kellogg was here. Trump announces, he makes threats even against China. And again, it's all talk right now, but it's not all talk. So some things are in motion. But there seemed to be an opening like we've never had before. And very disturbingly, within that 24-hour period, the Kyiv Independent, one of the main independent media in here in Ukraine, has an editorial, from the entire organization saying that Zelensky has authoritarian tendencies. And then I see a story in The Spectator saying something similar. There's a story in the Financial Times. So why now? And I look at this as part of the Russian information warfare. I think a lot of people are unwittingly playing into it. But if you remember during that Oval Office meeting with Trump and Zelensky, I got a lot of heat for, when I saw what was happening, I said it's very important that the White House and MAGA understand that Zelensky is not Ukraine, that people disagree with him because it's a healthy democracy. And it's very important if you're mad at Zelensky to understand that this is, he represents the people, but this is not only about him. And I made that point clearly because I knew that was what would save the relationship with Ukraine. But what happened, the pro-Ukraine voices, generally, everyone rallied behind Zelensky, and which I think actually hurt. It hurt things in Washington. But ironically now, the moment when Trump and Zelensky start to work together, I'm the one saying, hey, if you got criticisms now, it's not the time. It's so curious. But even Ukrainian media, people that gave me lots of grief back then after the Oval Office meeting. And I wasn't, all I was saying he needed to wear a tie. I wasn't even that extraordinary in my critique. And now they're saying that Zelensky is a totalitarian, Ukrainian media, and allegedly pro-Ukraine people. Why? Why the moment when he finally starts to work with Donald Trump? When finally we can, unlock American support, maybe. Why all of a sudden this negativity? Why undermine? And now, because you're going to have the White House thinking, wait. We were finally convinced to work with him. And now even people in his capital are undermining him. This is very disturbing to me, Jonathan. And so I would encourage the pro-Ukraine people to be very attuned to that, because I do think this is the Russian delight. I think this is exactly what the Russians want, to always undermine whenever there's some kind of a bridge building.
And they started with Under Yermak. I think there was a wave of stories about how Yermak had upset everybody in Washington. That came about sort of 3 weeks ago. Now they're turning on Zelensky. So it looks like a kind of concerted effort. Now, there are valid criticisms to be made. There are valid criticisms about the speed and pace of reform, about prosecution of various people on various charges of corruption. But and I would say with Yermak, there may be a little bit of fire where there's some smoke as well. But to make the accusation that Zelensky is a dictator, one would have to provide demonstrable evidence that he has no intention of leaving office when it becomes legal to hold elections. There is no such evidence. There's no such implication whatsoever. There's no hint or sign of anything like that. And most Ukrainians will tell you that Ukraine is not a society that would tolerate that for 5 minutes. They would be on the streets and there'd be another revolution if there was even a hint of the democratic process not being observed. So it is curious, isn't it? And it's odd that it coincides, as you say, with a period where there's a fine-tuning or even realignment of internal Ukrainian politics to make sure that they can try to build an alliance with Trump. It's a very destructive sort of move to try and undo that. Rather than the dictator headline, actually the one that really grabbed me is the complete opposite. He's just had a huge cabinet reshuffle. A lot of highly progressive people, highly competent people look like they're being pushed forward, including one of the most capable female politicians and negotiators in all of Ukraine, who's come from that and research civic society background. Now, for the last couple of years, civic society activists have been clamoring for more representation by people who understand, civic society and its power within Ukraine. It's the power that has actually ensured that Ukraine has survived. And the prime minister has just been appointed. She's female, she's progressive, and she comes from that, milieu that has links to civic society. So it's extraordinary, isn't it? It's here's the reality, which is hugely positive, and then you've got these stories which seem nearly propagandistic in their intent.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know. I mean, there was some free press concerns in recent weeks, so there was some merit to some of these things. But to me, it's extraordinary. I mean, when it would have been most helpful to criticize. Truly, this is just as speaking as an American who understands things in the White House a little bit. When it would have been most helpful to criticize Zelensky to show that Ukraine had a free and independent press, that was back in February. That's when it really would have helped. And now, when it's the least helpful, and so, okay, maybe it's just by accident, but it's just weird to me that all of this happens at once. All of this happens right at the moment when finally we're getting cooperation, and it's like they're trying to undermine. The same way that Trump is now facing this Epstein stuff, I think a lot of it, I know Americans have legitimate concerns about it. Some do. Mainly the talking heads do because they know it gets clicks. But my first thought when Trump started to really, say, what, Putin's full of crap, is that Epstein's going to come up. And because what the Russians want is Trump to have untenable rebellions with MAGA. He already, his first MAGA rebellion was when he made the strike on Iran. That was the first time there was sort of high-level public MAGA dissent. And Trump dispatched J.D. Vance to calm it down. That's why I think J.D. Vance is very important. Whatever argument you make is going to have to appeal to J.D. Vance. That's why I'm trying to show people that Ukraine is super religious and traditional. These things matter to him. You have to understand the structure, and this is what Trump understands. That's why he's in power. So again, we have to remember that. But I think there are plenty of political concerns, but you're in a war, and you have to. And this is a sign that Ukraine is truly free. It's positive that you can have media in Kyiv saying these things. I think even if wartime UK, you couldn't do that to the same
No,
degree. There
no,
are a lot
no.
of
There are huge restrictions in
yeah.
Second World War. Nothing like Ukraine. And you and I have I mean, you a lot more, but we've traveled throughout Ukraine. And you go through the normal military roadblocks, papers are checked, questions are asked at those roadblocks. Have you ever been stopped on the street? Has anyone come up to you and said, Joe, that reporting you did yesterday, right? We're gonna call you in for a little bit of questioning because we don't like the angle you're taking, or a guy in a trench coat sort of follows you around. Has that ever happened to you in
No,
Ukraine? I'm
no,
guessing
Jonathan.
not.
Only Americans come up and scream at me and threaten me, but never Ukrainians. And Ukrainians will debate everything, and that's what's so wonderful. It's and believe me, I mean, there's a lot of frustration, and I mean, one of the frustrations I've had, which I think we're starting to see remedied, but I'm also a little worried. I know that I don't want Ukraine the leader, Zelensky's team, to score an own goal. And that's, with Washington, because, you can get too excited. We have an opening. Well, okay, be smart. And I think, so they're getting rid of the ambassador. Nice lady, but she was not the right person to reach Trump. And they've announced an envoy, like a version of Keith Kellogg, a special envoy. But they have not yet announced the ambassador. And to me, this is a good sign. It means they're being thoughtful about it. And think about, what Sir Keir Starmer did in appointing an ambassador, Lord Mendelsohn. He knew he needed a lord or a lady. That's just going to work with America and with Trump. Okay? Use that optic. You got it. Use it. And Mendelsohn, a very urbane guy. He can relate to, as a business guy. That was a brilliant pick. Ukraine needs to do something similar. That's why I pushed, if you follow me on X, at JP Lindsley, from my friend Gandalf, the Azov warrior. Yes, Azov, because Azov is not what the propaganda says. So let's be, bold about the truth. Azov guy who listens to Ben Shapiro. He lost an eye and an arm in battle. Would be a great person. Serhii Stakhovsky, who defeated Roger Federer at Wimbledon in 2013, the biggest men's upset in Wimbledon history. Special Forces warrior. Someone like that who would give the right optics. You have to picture the Oval Office television show because that's what it is. And just accept it. That's what it is. Who's going to fit best in those scenarios? And so I really hope Ukraine is thinking deeply about this. If you're picking an ambassador, don't think about who your best friend is. That's for ambassador to some other country, but not to the U.S. right now when we're so close to unlocking what could be this extraordinary alliance. And so this is you really have to deeply understand American politics, but especially who the president is and what the MAGA mood is. And so there are so many Ukrainians I know who, if MAGA people heard them, and when I say MAGA, I just mean the heartland, regular people in Ohio, they would be inspired. And so this is what we have to sort of fix in this moment.
And that envoy is especially fascinating because, again, I think they're giving some thought to this. So apparently, the envoy is an expert on a whole range of things, but especially the kidnapped children. And I think this is quite clever. I mean, one, it is one of the most horrific issues of our time, and there's no question it's a disgusting example of Russia being not just brutal but monstrous on so many levels. Many of these children have suffered abuse, physical, mental, psychological abuse. Many of them are being brainwashed. Those who are near military age are starting to be inducted into the military so they can be turned and then thrown back to fight their own country, their own people. So it is one of the most disgusting issues there is, which unfortunately doesn't get nearly as much media attention as it should do. However, what I think Zelensky's administration has understood is that the issue of children being harmed does seem to catch Trump's attention, and especially it attracts everyone's attention, but especially sort of the conservative right, the religious right, and those in Trump's core inner circle. The idea of children being harmed in this way, it's a very evocative topic.
Well, I would say yes and no because it's the right strategy. Okay, think about what appeals to people, what bothers them, what are their pain points, and then make the case with some honest, relevant point that you have. But it still falls short, extremely short, because it doesn't. The strategy is based on an idea on paper, but not on really understanding the mood in America. So the opposition to Ukraine is not so it's not that people don't care about children. Actually, Americans do, as you point out. Evangelicals, I mean, everyone, decent person does. But people will be horrified about this. But there are good people who are not horrified about it because they don't believe it's true. That's the thing that's not being addressed. And why do they not believe it's true? Well, I think two things really. One, they don't trust Washington. And we don't like this is what I keep trying to say to Ukrainians. Ukraine doesn't trust Washington either. Budapest Memorandum. And so let's find this common juncture of sentiment and start with that foundation. So because we can make all the arguments in the world, and I think Trump is realizing this. He seems to be wanting to stop Russia, but he's got to be able to say things to the base, and to have JD Vance say things, and the when you talk with people, like when I talk with people who oppose Ukraine. And I don't do this anymore. When I used to mention the children as an argument, they just don't believe it because the Russians push the opposite. So who do you believe? And so this is where we really have to say, okay, why do people not want to believe in Ukraine? Well, it's because they've tied it to Joe Biden and by extension to the entire Republican and Democratic war machine, to George W. Bush. Like every time John Bolton speaks in favor of Ukraine, it puts another nail in the coffin for Ukraine in terms of MAGA support, because John Bolton was like the kind of the biggest liar about Iraq. That's what they think, So they don't trust a word that comes out of this guy's mouth. Many of these people used to support George W. and Iraq, and then they said, "Wait, no, that was a huge mistake." This is really at the core of the current American mood. So anytime Lindsey Graham or John Bolton say, we support Ukraine and there's kidnapped children, Americans say, you know what, guys, we believed you in 2003, no more, forget it. We really, really have to understand that with compassion, because I think I understand that this anger in America is totally justifiable. And so what we have to do is show that Ukraine is not connected with that, and first show people that, again, as President Zelensky now is saying, that Biden could not stop Putin. And, even as Jake Tapper reported, Hunter Biden was, according to Jake Tapper of CNN, his reporting, you can argue or dispute it, but he said that Hunter Biden was working as de facto chief of staff very often to his father. And Jake Tapper was shocked by this. And you see, because he says Hunter's not a good, stable person. What Jake Tapper was missing in his reporter, and what MAGA misses, is that Hunter Biden never received money directly from Kyiv. He was paid by Moscow for years, by friends of Putin. So if we can show MAGA this, all of a sudden people start to say, oh, wait a second. Okay, maybe I had it wrong about Ukraine. And then once you have that opening, then you can say, oh, by the way, here, look what Russia's doing. Look at the kids who've been kidnapped. Look at these horrible bombings on cities, which the first lady told the president, and it seems like it works. But we have to we can't do a partial strategy. If we're going to try to persuade people, don't just throw out something you think is going to work. Actually listen to the foundation of why they oppose Ukraine and change that foundation.
And of course, the other one, and this is big, this isn't just a sort of, MAGA or Republican, this is a Democrat thing, I think, as well, is no one wants to get into a forever war. And both Afghanistan and Iraq are questionable on a number of levels, how they're executed. The choice of actually, especially in Afghanistan, a country with no history of democracy, no foundations of it, and the idea that you can impose democracy on it, which is exceedingly expensive and extremely risky. And as we saw, ultimately, those seeds of democracy withered in many ways. Despite there being many people who would like to embrace, a democratic society, it didn't reach a critical threshold, and the number of people outside of the main cities that were willing to revert back to a theocratic totalitarianism was overwhelming. And there's many, many ways. So, all these arguments aside, no one wants to get into a war that's unwinnable. So this is the other argument, isn't it? To show that not only can Ukraine regain its territories, but actually Russia is a paper tiger. Actually, but it's threatened, it can do a lot of harm, a lot of damage, and it has done. But it is not the superpower that it makes itself out to. It is not inevitable, eternal, and invincible. Actually, it's crumbling before our eyes. Its economy is crumbling. It wouldn't take much just to sort of give it a knockout blow. And that means the Putin's regime as well. And we're not talking here about bombing Moscow or invading Russia or anything like that. We're simply talking about weakening Russia to the point where it cannot sustain a war on foreign soil and has to withdraw. Now, that's the case I think we can now make with facts and figures.
Well, if you put it this way, I mean, because there's ups and downs. I mean, Ukraine has had moments of real advantage that were squandered, and when Ukraine was restricted by the Biden administration, we've had many, or when Republicans want to vote for funding, there are many moments of squandering of the advantage, and same as for Russia. I mean, Russia, when Ukraine made its incursion into Kursk, and the New York Times had that disgraceful story last week, but when Ukraine made its incursion into Kursk, that was a chance. And if you had real leadership in Washington, they would have seized that moment. But instead, Ukraine was kind of left on its own, and Russia was greatly weakened. But what does Russia do? They're going to adapt because they want to win. So they went to the North Koreans. They brought dog-eating people to Europe, invading Europe. That should wake up some people. And they brought North Koreans to help them. And then Russia got a bit stronger. All right. So there can be moments of weakness, but if you don't seize that chance, because I put it this way because, often I heard from people in America, well, if Russia's so weak, then what's the big worry? So no, Russia has been weakened by what, Ukraine and allies have done. But that can always change. And imagine if Russia had the know-how, the mineral resources, the innovative resources, the human resources of Ukraine, it would be unstoppable in Europe. Goodbye, Europe. See, and this is what people miss. Like, if Ukrainians were weak, and I'll put it quite frankly, if Ukrainians were like the Iranian people and allowed themselves to be governed by a tyrant, if Ukrainians were like the people in Hong Kong, and I know it was very difficult, but Ukraine, what they have done was extraordinary. If they allowed themselves to be governed by tyrants, if they just, gave up their agency, if they didn't risk their lives every day, firstly against that regime in 2014, and now against ballistic missiles from Russia, then guess what? Ukrainians would be part of Russia, and they would be helping Russia destroy Europe. And it would be easy with Ukraine. It would be easy. So, and here's why I think America and the world should say thank you to Ukraine. This part, it's hard to see the counterfactual, but really, this is how extraordinary the effort of the Ukrainians has been. Their refusal to be part of a warmongering war machine. Like that's it. Ukrainians refuse to be part of that. And they're willing to bleed and die for it. And so this part gets missed. And I think this is, Russia is weakened now, and this can be stopped. But if it's not stopped, Russia will be incredibly powerful. And that duality is not a contradiction.
It's not because, the Soviet Union partly was as powerful as it was by imbibing the strength and resources of Central and Eastern Europe and especially Ukraine. So we have a tangible example of this. The Soviet Union would have been, or Russia would have been a hollow shadow of the power it was able to accrue under the Soviet Union without all those sort of external, more advanced countries. Let's be clear about that. They are, and Ukraine is, I think, culturally, civilizationally, and technologically more advanced than Russia, as well as socially as well. Let's just sort of linger on the tech or drones for weapons, because again, this is a topic where we've talked about innovation. We've also talked with you and with Deborah Fairland and many others about the bloated and sclerotic state of weapons procurement. The fact that the large weapons manufacturers have been gouging US taxpayers for decades now, and there's a kind of inflation or inflationary process in how these contracts are drawn up and these technologies. And some of the technologies are great, but of course they come with a huge, 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 huge price tag. One of the things about MAGA, and one of the things when Elon Musk was on board, which I thought, yes, it was focused on Doge, which one can argue till the cows go home as to whether that was a good way to use his skill or not. But the skill he absolutely does have, and which Ukraine has, and which I think Trump needs to really get some of, is the ability to look at tech processes, tech innovation processes, and how you carve costs out of those. You dramatically improve lead times, production times. You increase the amount of iterations you can make. So you have a far, more agile tech development process. And the end result costs a fraction of these big kind of bloated platforms. Now, that's the Ukrainian skill, which I think, Musk does in his equivalent of his SpaceX and so on. That is the stuff that Trump needs. Do you think he understands that?
Not quite yet, because that part of the story is not, we're not telling it well enough. And this is something I'm working on more. But to tell the story of specific Ukrainian companies and how they innovate, and how, for example, on my X at JP Lindsley, I had today this company called Core, which makes robots for the front line. They can do demining, they can do evacuations. Because, the front line used to be like 10 kilometers in width, and now it's like 40 to 50 because of drones. It's horrifying. And this is why it's very hard for medics to get in there. And I mean, there's just a huge, it's much bigger than a line. And so this drone technology is very necessary. It's developed, from the front. It's proven at the front. And, these drones, so in the case I was looking at today, the robots, they're robots. They can take away wounded people. They can deliver supplies. They can deliver weapons. They can demine, and they can mine. And they're about $10,000 to $15,000 each. Now, with Pentagon procurement, you have two things. You have enormous price tag, maybe 10 times more, and not tested and tuned, in battle. And we see this, even Palmer Luckey, more innovative, defense leader, and his company Anduril, he actually tweeted a few weeks ago he wants Ukraine to win, and but they're and I think he's got good intentions. But you have a lot of U.S. defense companies. They come to Ukraine for like 2 days, and they say, "Oh, our one drone that we brought here, they say was battle proven or battle tested." And usually, I know from the guys at the front that the stuff doesn't work, because often even Ukrainian stuff doesn't work right away, and you have to test it and tune it. Well, you can't when you have to go all the way back to the U.S. Slow procurement times. Don't know, and then the defense leaders, Americans, when they realize how quickly you have to adapt here, they don't want to go back to their investors and say we have to, the plants we're going to build in Ohio with $10 billion or whatever it doesn't make sense, and so they kind of hide that, and so there's I'm not saying they have bad motives. There's certainly people with bad motives, but there's just a corporate incentive to not behave in the right way here, and so this is where it's up to us to make the case, and I think that this is a case that MAGA would appreciate, and Doge. The only way Doge would have been serious is that if Doge had started with the Pentagon, and that was the thing they didn't touch, and so therefore I would call Doge a fraud because it was a great idea and needed, but they only touched it on the margins. They should have started. You know what? They should have started by examining so-called Ukraine spending. That would have been the place to start because the main argument for so many Americans, which I didn't mention yet, against Ukraine, $300 billion, they hear. Trump repeats that number. It's too much money. No one has examined it carefully. Under Biden, the reports were, in the old way of Washington, everything is muddled. Much of that so-called funding, which is more like $200 billion, was to buy new weapons for the U.S. By the way, a lot of which has not been spent. We're woeful, and this is a problem. We're woefully unprepared. We're not producing enough ATACMS, enough Patriots. This is a problem under Biden, and it's a problem under Trump. And so, but even the money that's not been spent is in these Ukraine packages, and it's attributed to Ukraine. So Ukraine is getting the blame not only for money that never comes to Ukraine, but also for money that's never ever been spent. It's ridiculous. And this would have been the first and most important thing for Doge to clarify. And so the fact that they didn't is a sin. And the interesting, if you look at what I'm looking at this New York Post headline, Trump discussing drone mega deal with Ukraine as U.S. tech lags behind adversaries. And Trump says the people of America need this technology. Okay, that's good, but the one piece that's missing now is actually this is better tech and more economical. And that's what Americans want. And that's the case we have to very vociferously make these next days and weeks.
And there's a lot of vested interests who are not going to want that message to come out, including the loaded arms manufacturers. But that's, I think we should keep plugging against, on that one. Let's turn to the final topic then. And this is Putin has been granted sort of this 50-day period in order to pack up and ship out, essentially, and end his war. Now, I think the intention was to put him on notice that this has to end, to put China and India on notice that in that 50-day period, they need to find other suppliers of oil, etc. So there's some logic to creating that deadline, because it's not just a deadline for Putin, it's a deadline for everybody who is still at risk of, these secondary trade sanctions for dealing with Russia. However, the way it's being taken, it seems, by Russian propagandists and politicians, is a kind of call to arms, a signal that to achieve their maximalist and frankly delusional and evil objectives, they need to throw everything into the meat grinder. And I say that literally. So the likelihood is, I know it's been quiet in Kyiv, but before Kellogg came and there's this little bit of a lull, Ukraine was being hammered all over, and Kyiv especially, in a way that people hadn't felt before. And as you say, it's deeply traumatic and disturbing. The likelihood is that will resume. And it will continue in this 50-day period because Russia sees terrorizing civilians as a key part of their so-called military strategy. They see it as a way of creating Ukraine without Ukrainians. They think people are going to flee to the West. They think they're going to turn Ukrainian cities into rubble, so there'll be nothing there for people to inhabit. And they think they can destroy all the infrastructure so that life cannot be sustained across Ukraine. We know that this doesn't really work, but they do cause a lot of harm and they kill and maim huge numbers of civilians in the process. What are your thoughts on this 50 days? And this is going to be quite a dangerous period for Ukraine potentially.
Yeah, well, but there's a positive spin on it that has not been discussed, which is also the 50 days is a space for Ukraine. If more of these weapons get here fast enough, it's a space for Ukraine to do something as well. That's very important because the problem with these, like, the Putin's Easter ceasefire or even a 2 week ceasefire, which was never going to happen, is that it gives that's a disadvantage to Ukraine because they can't do anything during that time. But Russia, of course, can do whatever they want, and Russia just needs time. They need time to re-strategize and reconfigure. I mean, it's after like when Joe Biden sent HIMARS to protect Kharkiv, and Ukrainians could use them to hit on Russian soil in May of 2024, June of 2024. Russians were for about 3 weeks. Their attacks declined because they had to scramble and adapt. And that would have been the time to pour on the pressure. So I think it's also good. It's vital to look at this 50 days, not only from the perspective, okay, even pro-Ukraine people were saying, oh, this is giving Russia space to do something. No, let's remember, it's giving Ukraine, if the weapons do get here, it's giving Ukraine 50 days to do extraordinary things too, if they have these new tools.
Well, this is interesting, Jay, because I hadn't thought of it that way. And some people in the comments would be saying, oh, you're just trying to spin this. But actually, I think this is a really, really good point. Because when the fake peace process was going on, and in the run up to the election, there was pressure from Trump and before that Biden at certain critical points, pressure on Ukraine not to hit Russian territory, not to strike their oil infrastructure, not to go all out and disrupt Russian logistics, and just, keep their weapons holstered, which meant a lot of Ukrainians suffered. So, yeah, this 50 days is a period where I mean, if Russia has more leeway, then Ukraine has more leeway. And actually, they could really hammer the hell out of Russian logistics. They could shut down the airports as they've been doing. They could disrupt logistics, oil supplies. They could, as has been rumored, take out some of those grey fleet vessels because an enormous number of them seem to have exploding engine rooms. And there's a rumor of limpet mines being attached to them. So I like that thinking, and there's some truth in there.
Well, and I think I was attuned to that possibility because I don't know if you know this guy Hugo Dixon. He's worth following. He's Winston Churchill's great grandson, and he's a financial journalist, and he's been pushing a plan that would make it palatable for Europe to use seized Russian assets to pay for the weapons from America. But in his plan, he said this should be done in 60-day tranches. And the idea is that if Russia doesn't agree to something by this date, you don't give Russia you don't say, okay, well, you don't agree today, then we'll try again tomorrow or the next day. No, no, no. If you don't agree by this date, then we have almost 2 months of Ukraine to do whatever they want. We send the next, batch of weapons and permission, and we're going to show you what we can do. And then you come back to the table or to the, to the conversation in 60 days and say, do you want to stop now? Okay, you're not going to stop now? 60 more days. We're going to break you even more. That's
Hand
it.
over the
That's
assets, give them more weapons, etc. Yeah.
Yeah. And to me, it seems a much smarter strategy than this endless, as long as it takes, and we really put Ukraine at the disadvantage. I mean, remember when there was that, Ukraine has done better in the Black Sea by fighting back with its drones. And I tell you, this is a story the White House still doesn't know. I don't think they really know it, because no one, this stuff gets lost. And Ukraine is doing better in the Black Sea than when they had the negotiated deal with the United Nations, because that deal, gave Ukraine a corridor to export grain, but Ukraine couldn't fight back, and Russia controlled the sea. Now they're able to fight back, and so it's the same principle here. So if these 50 days are used well, yeah, it's going to be difficult. And Russia, it's Russia's going to do everything they can. I mean, for 3 years they've been unable to break the spirit. At some point, though, I mean, I, the conscription rate, more and more people getting conscripted. It's really brutal. It's really difficult. Something does need to change quickly. Fortunately, at last, maybe I forget that quote from Churchill, but maybe we can get America fully on board here. It's very, very important that that happens, and that's why, I think, knowing how to appeal to Trump and to MAGA, which means firstly respecting the people whom you're trying to persuade, is of critical importance. And I would encourage anyone, before you're about to say something negative or nasty, think about the guys in the trench and what tools they need. And if your negative and nastiness, if your negativity and nastiness is going to help that guy in the trench or not. And and I've seen, sort of this, everyone's allowed to be negative except for, sort of, except, I don't know, I'll put it this way. Just really think about that. Really think. Because in this, in our age of communication and mass communication, people far away they've already played an amazing role in keeping Ukraine alive, like your audience and everyone that helps. And this is the next phase of that. And a key part of that is knowing how to reach Americans in a very persuasive way. And we can really do a lot of good, but we have to be very strategic about it.
That's it. That's it. And that's precisely what you're doing, trying to put aside party political points in order to say, well, how do we get Ukraine what it needs, rather than playing the partisan game of scoring points. And I think everyone is advised to think carefully about if they're about to tweet something. Yes, they may feel it has energy, they may feel it's morally correct, but does it help Ukraine? Is it strategic, or are they doing it for entertainment purposes?
I mean, and I've seen this in the past weeks. There's certain big, pro-Ukraine accounts who, got huge followings, and people become afraid of the algorithm, and I understand that, but this is where we all have to kind of collectively help each other, and if there is, an opening, and think of how Zelensky. I mean, one of the toughest things of his job is, knowing how to walk with kings yet maintain the common touch, as Kipling said. And that's why I really hope that his team figures out who to send to Washington in the right way. And again, always remembering the Oval Office optics. It is by design a reality TV show, and we have to work with that and embrace it. And come on, Ukraine has incredible stories to tell. There's no reason why they can't. And Zelensky's an entertainer himself, by training and by profession. So there's no reason why they can't do extremely well in this moment. And this is exactly what Russia fears the most, is that America and Ukraine will be best allies and friends. And we really have to be sort of protecting this moment, because the Russians are going to do anything they can to undermine that.
I think that's a good place to sort of bring it to a close. But I think you're right. I mean, Trump, we all know, also has a relatively short attention span. I mean, many people as they get older do anyway. Men more than women, but Trump especially. He's not a politician by training, and I think he gets frustrated with the slow pace at which things occur. That is going to work against Putin in the long run, I think, because he's not minded to stop. He is not going to stop. He has, as I said in a recent video, he has one emotion, which is aggression. He has one strategy, which is to escalate. And he's going to carry on doing that. He's not going to stop because his survival is based on war now. And I don't think he is a particularly strategic thinker. So this is going to kind of piss Trump off eventually, seeing no concession whatsoever and the sort of ongoing slaughter, which I think, politics aside, I think Trump just doesn't understand why would anybody fight? Why would anyone do this? I think there's a certain amount of incomprehension on his side towards this.
Yeah, and I think, and he's starting to comprehend that Putin is, so, there's no virtue there. That when Margaret Thatcher realized in 2000, after the Kursk submarine tragedy, that there's no humanity there. But we really have to remember that even as Trump realizes this, he still needs the arguments and stories he can give to the base. And Trump's awakening here started on like how Russia is bad, but he didn't have why Ukraine is great because that's been so suppressed. Because the story of why Ukraine is great has not been told in a way that can appeal to the heartland of America or by trustworthy voices. And so that's the task of these next weeks. And I'm already encouraged again by seeing Trump now forget the minerals. Now Trump praising Ukraine's incredible tech. And then let's talk about it can be done at a much cheaper rate. It exposes the corruption, waste, fraud, and abuse that we have throughout the West and the profiteering. You can still make profits from it, but it's in a reasonable way and it's more effective. And this is a compelling story. Ukraine and the United States and the European stalwarts as partners in freedom, business, and security. What a wonderful world that'll be. So,
It's a great place to end. Joe, thank you so much for coming back on.
thank you, Jonathan. And always great to talk to you. You can always follow my stuff at JP Lindsley on X and Instagram primarily. And yeah, until next time, Jonathan, always thanks for the conversation and analysis.
Huge pleasure. Huge pleasure. Stay safe and keep up the good work.